Well, welcome, Senator Hinds. The floor is yours if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us about your candidacy and maybe answer some questions after you're finished.
Great, appreciate it. Yeah, and it's great to see you all here. I have to admit, it's heartening to kind of see that folks are giving up time on a Wednesday night to make sure the structure of our democracy is strong. It feels even more meaningful after kind of the 1-year anniversary of January 6th last week. And so thanks to all of you for the work you're doing for the party and for Massachusetts. So it is true. I'm currently the state senator for the 52 westernmost municipalities, and I'm running for lieutenant governor, quite honestly, because it feels like we're at a unique moment in our history, at a time when the pandemic has exposed our greatest weaknesses and obviously some of our strengths as well, in terms of communities coming together like we have. But for all that we've seen in COVID-19 and our ongoing racial reckoning and the economic downturn, it's really highlighted so much of what needs fixing. And it's a rare moment when we have the will to do something about these big issues, and it's overlapping with the resources to actually make progress as well. I mean, literally right now in the Senate and the legislature, we're allocating billions of dollars to the next administration. And so more of the status quo in that environment is not what this moment calls for. It's my view that if we don't make progress on addressing inequity and disparate outcomes by income, by race and geography, then we will have failed. It feels that straightforward to me at this moment. And that's what got me into the race. It's going to take visionary leadership to take on some big challenges like we have, but just as importantly, leaders with a record of bringing people together and getting things done. And I'll take you through a little bit of why that's what I've done in my background, and wanting to use that experience to make meaningful change in this state that we all love. So a little bit about my background. I grew up in a small town in Franklin County, in the district I now represent. And I saw in that town firsthand how our shifting economy has impacted families, including my own. My dad left a tool manufacturing company to undertake his own retraining program at the age of 50. So he went back to school to become a teacher. So he and I entered middle school at the same time, him as a teacher and me as a student. My mother was a librarian down the hall in the same high school. So needless to say, I didn't get away with much in high school, but that's fine. But it's that sense of what we're seeing with the economic downturn caused by COVID has highlighted a lot of what we need to do differently. The fact that so many were on the verge of economic disaster because of decades of wage stagnation and stifled mobility, high housing costs, childcare costs. It doesn't matter anymore how hard you work, how many hours in a day, you can still be close to the edge, and that's just not right. After college, I went to grad school over at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and then joined the Kerry campaign for president, ultimately working for Susan Rice on that campaign, who became Barack Obama's national security advisor. As we know, John Kerry did not win that race. And so I left and joined the United Nations for about 10 years and started in Iraq in 2005. And ultimately working on a disputed territory negotiation. Was a team leader in that negotiation between the Kurdistan region and the rest of the country. Was pulled over to Jerusalem for 2 years, where I was a regional advisor to the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process. That was right before the Kerry push, so I ended up doing a lot of Gaza ceasefires and spending a lot of time in Beirut and Amman and those types of places. And then finished up on Syria, working with Kofi Annan on the first ceasefire there when the civil war was kicking off, and then ultimately removing their chemical weapons program. But I always wanted to get back to Massachusetts, honestly, and take on the issues here. I end up leading 2 nonprofits in Berkshire County, where I live now, and one I started with to help high-risk youth getting involved in violence, and then the other focused more on mental health and job creation. So I've drawn on all those experiences to shape how I go about my work in the Senate. And right now I'm leading, among other things, the Senate's effort to reimagine Massachusetts post-pandemic, and kind of deliberately putting strategies together to either address the flaws in our institutions or the investment choices that have kind of led to these generational inequities, and also identifying ways to prepare us for the work of the future. And so I think that's one role the LG, the Lieutenant Governor's office, can play. is be a center of gravity for all of the secretaries doing this work, trying to rethink our institutions and bring Massachusetts into the future in an equitable and strategic manner. The race is off to a good start. You know, I announced back in October, long before we heard from the governor, and since then we've rolled out about 24 endorsements, literally from mayors and senators and reps across the Commonwealth, from the Berkshires to Barnstable, and so it's been going well in terms of where we want to be going into the election year. I'll close with this. You know, I became a father about 7 months ago, 7.5, and when my wife gave birth to our child, our son, you know, when you're a new parent, it makes this work in this fight even more meaningful. You can be confronting climate change with the urgency of now, but it's also for my son and his generation, or fighting so that this generation can experience social and racial justice differently. In fact, my son is a part of the migration story. My wife, Elisa, is Mexican-American, and her grandfather came to the US, drove trucks his entire life so that she could have every opportunity available to her. And sure enough, she's you know, a college professor and knocks it out of the park every single day. And yet that type of intergenerational mobility is almost unheard of today, according to the data. And so it's, you know, restoring that sense of opportunity is one thing that's really driving me. It's a unique moment, and it calls for visionary leadership and acting together, bringing people together. As my background, I spend a lot of time doing, bringing people together to actually take on challenges and problem solving. And I hope that I can do that with all of you. And I really appreciate giving me a few minutes to introduce myself and say hi.
Thank you so much. That was a great intro. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead, John. John Thompson.
Hey, John.
Good evening and Happy New Year to you, Adam. Realistically, the lieutenant governor only does what the governor allows the lieutenant governor to do. Worst case scenario, if you and the governor did not agree, what can you do?
Well, I guess you can oversee the governor's council every Wednesday at noon, so there's that. No, it's true. It's a notoriously undefined role. I think most of you know that. And so it relates to the governor's council, which is ultimately a judicial function and kind of you know, dealing with nominations and the like. There is a function related to ports as well. And I would say that we've seen with Tim Murray and the current lieutenant governor that liaison with municipalities and legislators has been a critical one, just for cutting red tape and making sure that government is functioning. You know, I agree that it depends on your relationship with the governor, and I think that the good news is I have good relationships with the current candidates and another one that's rumored to be considering it, and so including with the Attorney General, we're working on legislation together now, and so there's a lot of goodwill and all around. So I would hope that's not an issue, but I take your point that it is an interesting position that you can define it. And it's my sense, and I kind of dwell on this in my remarks, that we hopefully would use this moment to make sure the administration is taking on the big issues, you know, making sure that we're doing all we can for housing and transportation investments. You know, I alluded to the resources we have. We literally have billions of dollars that we're allocating. And by that, I should have been even more clear. We're talking about, you know, $2.3 billion left in ARPA. We had $3.5 billion in a budget surplus from fiscal 21 that we didn't know we had. We've got more than $8 billion for infrastructure. We assume there might be more with Build Back Better. I mean, it's pretty phenomenal. It's literally, I've been calling it a once in a generational opportunity to have these major investments. People are telling me, no, it might be even more than that. Maybe a once in a century opportunity. So it's a big moment, but good question.
I have a question. I have been very interested, and many of our members have been, in equity issues. And what is your take as a senator on if there'll be progress on the Indigenous agenda this year. And the state seal bill seems to be just in that committee, and we have heard nothing about it. We still have about 35 towns and cities in Massachusetts who have Indigenous mascots. And although Braintree got rid of the image, it still has uses a Native American name that's offensive to the Massachusetts tribal council and so what it is, I mean, these are bills that are introduced every year. And as someone who's interested in equity and for all people, what prospects do you see for that, and what kind of advocacy do you suggest?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It is important, and the fact that we're taking these steps, right here, it's so easy for us to often say, "Oh boy, we have problems in other parts of the country," but there's a lot happening in our own neighborhoods. And I went to a high school that had Native imagery and that was similarly removed, and the name sticks. I agree that the state seal is underway. It's a good point that I guess I don't know why we haven't seen progress yet. I'll have to refresh my memory on what the deadlines were for the commission's work, so maybe I'll do my homework on that and send you an email.
Yeah.
When we passed that last term, there was the sense that we would do the mascots this session, and honestly, I think we should. Precisely because it becomes so contentious at the local level, and so it's actually, it feels like the way that we can move forward in a way that's in a more timely way. I put forward a bill. It kind of, I guess it's, now that I told you about my background, it won't surprise you that I put forward a bill like this, but it's essentially a Truth and Reconciliation Commission type structures for our Commonwealth, where community foundations would lead conversations on just these types of issues. Because I don't know if any of you saw 60 Minutes last Sunday, but I watched it, and they talked about this concept of contact theory. And so I was very familiar with it because of my work with the UN, and it essentially says, once you actually talk to each other, instead of throwing darts on social media, you actually can understand the experience of the other, and it's one of the few proven techniques for actually reducing community violence and tension. But it has to be meaningful contact. It can't just be any kind of contact, and it's based on starting with how is this impacting you, and that was powerful in my high school, where the imagery was changed, in part because someone that was maybe she was a few years ahead of me. But a Native woman who's essentially said, here's what it felt like walking into the gym. Here's how I was impacted, and I felt dehumanized, and I felt like I was an object, and on and on and on. And so it just changed the narrative so meaningfully when you had that kind of a conversation and an interaction. And so, I think that's, the direction we should go. And we're not asking a lot here. I mean, this is simply, let's start to recognize where those images came from, and the impact that they still have to this day, and on and on.
Thank you. I appreciate it if you could just send us an email about what the status of that commission is. We have people asking about it on our social media groups in Braintree, and I had heard that had not met often or made much progress, but I don't know what the case is.
Okay.
John Cass has his hand up. John?
Yes, thank you, Kathy. So Senator Hinds, good to see you again. So you mentioned all of that money that's coming into the state, and I was curious to know where you think it should be spent, and what your policies would be on transportation and schools. And then lastly, and I'm sorry, covering three, but I think it's so important, housing.
Yeah, so you've nailed the big ones. I think we did the ARPA 1.0. That put about 1.5 billion into economic development and jobs. It put about 600 million into housing. It did put another, I want to say 300 million for schools, but that's slightly complicated because it's separate from the Student Opportunity Act. It's separate from the ESSER, the federal funds. So I think I like your top three, that's for sure. It has to be one-time money that we're putting a lot of this money towards, because it's a one-time pot of revenue that we've received versus sustained over time. And so investments in transportation, like improving rail. I'm a big West-East rail proponent, given where I live. And those are the types of funds that you're going to need billions of dollars for that type of investment. But I think rethinking our commuter rail has been a big outcome of this, and obviously the T in general, in terms of improvements, but also, if you're asking people to do a mode shift from cars into the trains, you need to have the right price point, which has been a hot topic. I do support a price that can be, low income fare rate as well. The technology, the cleanliness, all those things, the timeliness, it just has to be improved. And so putting money towards that makes a heck of a lot of sense. And then of course, housing, you're right. I mean, we need more houses. So expanding the housing stock, we've seen that some of the housing costs and increases have just been amazing during COVID. And we tried to track, in my committee on reimagining Mass, we tried to track, can we point to which communities saw more movement in their direction by tracking housing costs? So where did real estate and housing prices go up? We saw a flight from the downtowns, but you couldn't really identify which region maybe benefited more than others. I will say Berkshire County out in Western Mass, out here, did have some of the biggest increases, but it was a lot of New Yorkers, so it kind of skewed what we were trying to look at. Anyway, so housing, a big point that I think right now the big solution is we're putting money on it and then trying to work on the zoning issues that start to get in the way sometimes, and go from there. You mentioned a third one. Oh, schools. Yeah, I mean, so as you probably know, the Student Opportunity Act, we made the commitment to stay on track with that during COVID. The $1.5 billion every year when it's fully implemented in year 7, with a focus on low income, correcting for that, and English learners, just critical. And I feel like we're not done. Early education and higher ed need attention now. And this all speaks to the Fair Share Amendment, and which is going to be on the ballot in November. And so making sure that passes is, we're talking about nearly $2 billion in sustained funds for schools, for transportation. And so it's got to be a priority of ours this year, for sure.
Thank you, Senator Hinds. Really appreciate it.
You got it.
Thank you very much, Senator Hinds. I really appreciate you coming to our meeting and your thoughtful answers to our questions. Quentin Palfrey has entered the meeting.
Then I'm out of here. I saw Kelly had your hand up. I'll put my email in here.
I'm sorry. Yeah, we have time. We have time.
If you don't mind, Senator Hinds, thank you for coming here tonight and speaking with us. Appreciate it. I appreciate the work that you've done in the Senate. I know that you're a co-sponsor of a number of progressive bills that I'm passionate about. Common Start, the Debt-Free College, Medicare for All, the Homes Act, Safe Communities Act, and a lot of the justice and equality legislation that's been pending. And that's all great. It's what I think we need to move forward. But as you know, it's a very crowded race for Lieutenant Governor. So how are you going to set yourself apart from the rest of the people that also believe in some of these other progressive issues that you also believe in? Thank you.
Yeah, so I would say a couple things. One, I increasingly, given what I just described in terms of endorsements and where we are with cash on hand, it's unfortunate that that's a data point that matters. But as someone explained to me, you can have a vision, but if you don't have the resources to get it out there, then it's hard to win an election statewide. And but so being positioned well there, I'm beginning to say, I'm the progressive who can win. And so that's a big part of it. That's a big part of my how I'm positioning myself. I think the other piece is in this contentious moment, how do you go about promoting a progressive policy and a progressive conversation while bringing people along or on board with it, right? And kind of making sure that we're moving the Commonwealth forward. And so that's drawing on my background. I think a unique background that that is kind of has been focused on navigating a contentious political moments elsewhere, and now how do I do that as an elected official right here? And so making sure that we're able to explain to folks why we're seeing some big challenging divisions here in Massachusetts, and I've often been asked, well, what you spend a lot of time in conflict reduction, what are you doing in this moment? And I often bring people back to just simple principles that we agree to as folks who could be on the extreme right or otherwise. And it can often be things like, do we believe in fairness? Do we believe in equal opportunity? And let's talk about why when we're trying to address an issue, why decades of policy choices in the Commonwealth and in this country have led to inequities and disparate outcomes, and let's work on that together. And so I think that's part of it too, is reaching these progressive policies, doing it in a way where you bring people on so they can actually pass, and then moving the Commonwealth together or forward together. And so that's a unique piece to this work as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate the time you spent with us and answering member questions. And we wish you the best of luck. Thank you for joining us.